She arrived with nothing but a name on a piece of yellowed paper and a pair of worn leather boots that had never quite fit her feet. The wind that morning tasted of iron and pine, and the hills ahead were the kind that seemed to lean in toward a person, curious and ancient, as if they had been waiting for precisely this girl to arrive. Patricia Venthrow stood at the base of the path, the hem of her red dress catching against the tall grass, her white hair loose around her shoulders, pale as winter light, and she looked up at the rise of land before her with eyes that held the particular kind of quiet that belongs only to those who have learned to expect very little from the world. She was 18 years old. She had grown up behind stone walls and beneath a roof that leaked whenever the rain came sideways, which in the town of Ashvale was most of the year. The orphanage of the Sisters of the Grey Morning had given her shelter and porridge and a cot near the window that let in the cold, and she had been grateful for each of these things in the way that people are grateful when they have no alternative. The sisters had been neither cruel nor particularly kind. They had given her a number before they gave her a name, and she had grown up understanding that the world moved forward without much concern for girls like her. Omega-born and unclaimed, pale as a candle flame and just as easy to extinguish. Her father had died before she could remember his face. She knew almost nothing about him except for a single sentence written in a notary's cramped hand on the paper she now carried folded inside the bodice of her dress. Henrik Venthrow, deceased, bequeaths to his sole heir the parcel of land known locally as the Hollowed Ravine, situated in the northern foothills of the Ardenmere Range, map coordinates enclosed. The notary who had delivered the letter to the orphanage 3 weeks ago had looked at her over his spectacles with an expression that mixed pity and faint surprise, as though he had not expected the heir to be quite so young, quite so slight, quite so red-dressed and white-haired and alone. She had studied the map for 21 nights before she left. Now she climbed. The path was barely a path at all, more of a suggestion made by the boots of whoever had walked it last, which appeared to have been a very long time ago. The grass grew thick and uncut. Thorned brambles reached across from either side like hands reaching for a hem. The hills on either side were broad-shouldered and dark with ancient forest, and above them the sky was the color of pewter, warming slowly toward gold. Patricia climbed steadily, neither fast nor slow, because she had learned in the orphanage that the surest way to survive anything was to find the pace that could be maintained indefinitely, and to hold it without deviation. She heard the ravine before she saw it. It was a sound she had no name for at first, a low vibration that was not quite a hum, and not quite a rush of water, but something between the two and beneath both, as if the earth itself were exhaling slowly through stone. It rose through the soles of her boots and into her ankles, and traveled up the length of her spine, with the particular warmth of a fire seen through a window from a cold street. She stopped walking. She put her hand against the bark of an oak tree to steady herself, and stood very still, listening. The sound continued, patient, certain, old. She walked toward it. The ravine revealed itself as the land dropped away without warning, a crack in the earth that widened as she approached, cutting down through limestone and clay and something darker below, stone that was almost black and threaded through with veins of a mineral she had never seen, which caught the morning light and held it, the way amber holds the ghost of ancient sunlight. The walls of the ravine descended perhaps 30 feet on either side, and at the bottom there was no water, only moss and shadow, and the sound, closer now, warmer, almost like breathing. Patricia knelt at the edge and looked down. The symbols were the first thing she noticed. They were carved into the stone walls of the ravine at intervals of perhaps 4 feet, each one slightly different from the last, as though they were a sentence written in a language that had not been spoken in a very long time. They glowed with a faint luminescence that was not quite blue and not quite silver, a color for which she had no word, and they pulsed in rhythm with the sound that moved through the earth, slow and certain, like a heartbeat. She had seen symbols before in the orphanage's small library, in books about old magic and older history. She had read those books with the particular hunger of someone who suspects that the world contains more than it shows her, and she had memorized the shapes of certain runes the way other girls memorize songs. These were not the runes from those books. These were older. These were the kind of shapes that preceded written language, that existed in the space before the first person understood that a mark in stone could carry meaning forward through time. She did not understand them, but she recognized them, the way one sometimes recognizes a melody heard in a dream. Patricia looked at the map again. The coordinates matched. This was the hollowed ravine. This was what her father had left her. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube, extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. She found the path down along the northern wall, a series of carved handholds and narrow ledges that had been cut deliberately, long ago, by someone who had known they would need to descend. She went carefully, her red dress gathered in one hand, her other hand flat against the stone, and the stone was warm beneath her palm, warmer than the morning air, warmer than stone had any right to be. When her boots touched the floor of the ravine, the sound became a sensation, a resonance that filled her chest and behind her eyes, not unpleasant, but enormous, the way a cathedral feels when you first step inside, and the acoustics swallow you whole. She breathed slowly and let herself adjust to it. The cavern entrance was halfway along the ravine's length, concealed by a curtain of old vines and a boulder that had been positioned with purpose, not fallen by accident. She moved the vines aside with her hands, and put her shoulder against the boulder, and pushed. And it rolled away more easily than it should have, as if it had been waiting for precisely the right pressure to release it. Inside, the darkness lasted only a moment before the symbols on the walls began to brighten, responding to her presence with the unhurried certainty of light that has been sleeping and has now been gently woken. The cavern was larger than the entrance suggested, its ceiling arching high above her in a dome that could have held a house. The floor was smooth, worn by feet she could not count, and in the center of the space stood the portal. She had not expected a portal. She had expected, perhaps, a cache of old things, her father's possessions, something personal and human. She had expected the ordinary artifacts of a life, tools, books, a chest of cloth or coin. She had not expected this architecture of light and stone, this frame of carved rock standing 9 feet tall and 5 feet wide, threaded through with the same glowing mineral she had seen in the ravine walls, the veins of it alive with that blue-silver luminescence that had no proper name. The runes on the portal's frame were the same shapes as those on the ravine walls, but denser here, layered, generation upon generation, of carving overlaid until they formed a texture as complex as brocade. The air around the portal was different from the air in the rest of the cavern, warmer, denser, carrying a charge that raised the fine hairs on Patricia's arms and made the ends of her white hair lift slightly, as if drawn upward by an invisible current. She stood before it for a long time. She did not touch it. Not yet. She was 18 years old, and she had grown up being told that she owned nothing, that she was nothing. And she had learned to be careful with things that were precious, because in her experience, precious things were usually not for her. She stood and she looked, and she breathed the charged air, and she tried to understand what she was seeing. What she understood, slowly, in the way that truth sometimes arrives not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual warming, was that the portal was not a doorway to another place. It was a conduit to something beneath this one. The energy she had felt since the moment she arrived at the ravine was not random. It was organized. It flowed through the mineral veins in the rock, through the carved symbols, through the structure of the portal's frame, and it gathered here at this focal point with the intention of someone who had spent a long time learning how to make the earth serve a purpose. This was a place of power. This was a sanctuary, and it had been waiting for her. She reached into the bodice of her dress and took out the folded paper with her father's bequest. She unfolded it and read the sentence again. Henrik Venthrow, deceased, bequeaths to his sole heir the parcel of land known locally as the Hollowed Ravine. She turned the paper over, and for the first time noticed what she had not seen before. A second inscription, in different ink, older, written in a hand that shook slightly with either age or emotion. Patricia. When you find this place, do not be afraid. It has been waiting for someone from our line. The ravine knows its guardian. Let it teach you. You are stronger than the world has told you. She read those words 3 times. Then she sat down on the smooth stone floor before the portal, crossed her legs beneath her red dress, placed her hands on her knees, and waited for the teaching to begin. It began as sensation, the warmth of the portal's radiance moving through the air toward her, like the wave of heat from an opened oven door. Then it moved through her skin, into the muscle beneath, into the pathways of her blood, and she felt it the way she had always imagined music might feel to someone who had been deaf since birth. An arrival of something that the body recognized as necessary, even though it had never experienced it before. Her eyes closed without her deciding to close them. Her breathing slowed and deepened. The symbols on the walls continued their patient pulse. She did not know how long she sat there that first day. When she finally opened her eyes, the light in the cavern had changed. The natural illumination from the ravine's opening had shifted to the warm amber of late afternoon, and the portal's glow had changed slightly too, as if calibrated to the day's end. She was not cold. She was not hungry. She was something she had never been before, and it took her a moment to identify it. She was full, not with food, with something else, with the sense that she belonged somewhere, with the certain knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She climbed back out of the ravine as the sun touched the western ridge of the hills, and she made camp at the ravine's edge with the supplies she had carried in her pack from the town below. A blanket, a small pot, dried provisions, a book of botany she had borrowed permanently from the orphanage's shelves, because she had been the only person in 4 years who had taken it down. She made a fire from the deadfall wood that was plentiful at the forest's edge, and she ate, and she looked at the stars, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel that the space around her was something to be endured. The world was very large. She was very small, but the ravine was hers, and it had spoken to her in the language of warmth and resonance, and she intended to understand what it was saying. She went back down into the cavern every day for the following week. Each day she learned something new. She learned that if she placed both hands on the portal's frame, the energy flowed through her more efficiently, not painfully, but with purpose, as if she were a channel being cleared. She learned that different symbols responded to different kinds of attention, some to touch, some to proximity, some to a quality of focus that she could only describe as listening with the entire body rather than just the ears. She learned that the mineral veins in the stone were not passive conductors but something closer to roots, alive in a slow mineral way, connected to the deep strata of the earth's bones, and drawing from a reservoir that was ancient beyond her ability to imagine. She filled the botany book with new observations, pressing her cramped notation into the margins around the illustrations of plants, recording the symbols she was learning to read, the sequences and their apparent meanings, the relationships between the portal's structure and the energy flows she could feel, and gradually, haltingly, begin to direct. She slept well. She dreamed of her father's face, though she had never known it. A broad face with her same pale coloring, her same quality of stillness. Standing at the portal with his hands raised and his eyes closed and light pouring through him like light through a lantern. She woke on the 8th morning to the sound of hooves. The sound was distant at first, then closer, the deliberate percussion of a horse being ridden with confidence over rough ground. Patricia sat up from her blanket and looked toward the path that wound up from the valley. and she saw the rider emerge from the tree line at the base of the hill. He was visible even from that distance as someone who occupied more of the world than ordinary people do. He sat the horse the way some men sit, not perched on it, but part of it, a unity of motion, and his shoulders were broad enough that the morning sky seemed to shrink behind them. He wore dark riding clothes, no armor, a dark coat that moved with the wind, and his hair was black and long, loose around his face, and even at a distance the angle of his jaw and the set of his head communicated something Patricia's body understood, before her mind had time to translate it. Authority. Not the borrowed kind. The kind that comes from a position or a uniform. The kind that lives in the bone. She stood and shook the dew from her blanket and folded it with the unhurried composure she had practiced all her life, and she waited. He brought the horse to a stop at the edge of the camp and looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He was perhaps 30 years old. Close up, the details resolved into something more specific. The long black hair, the short dark beard that followed the line of his jaw with precision, the black eyes beneath heavy brows that were not angry but intent, focused on her with the kind of attention that takes inventory without being rude about it. He was very large, she noted with the practical calm she applied to most observations, the kind of large that suggested serious physical labor, or serious combat, or both. The muscles of his forearms visible where he had rolled his sleeves, the width of his hands where they held the reins. And there was something else about him, something around the edges of his presence, a quality that she recognized from the portal, not identical but related, as if the same deep earth that resonated in the ravine also resonated in this man, faint and subterranean, the way a struck bell is still ringing long after you can hear it. "This is private land," she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "I know," he said. His voice was lower than she expected, a baritone with a particular quality of restraint in it, as if he habitually said less than he was thinking. "I am sorry to intrude on it. I am looking for a ravine in these hills. I had a map, but maps of this range are unreliable." Patricia regarded him for another moment. "Why are you looking for a ravine?" He swung down from the horse with the ease of long practice and stood on the ground. And standing, he was even taller than he had seemed on horseback, 2 full heads above her and then some. He did not move toward her but stayed where he was, one hand on the horse's neck, and she noticed that he had registered her position relative to the ravine's edge and had not advanced past the invisible line of her personal territory. That was deliberate. She was sure of it. "I had a dream," he said, and something in the directness of the statement suggested that he was not accustomed to saying things like this, that it cost him something to say it plainly. 7 nights ago. In the dream I saw a portal in a ravine in these hills, carved stone and light, and a woman in a red dress standing before it. His black eyes moved briefly to her dress and back to her face. The dream was not like other dreams. It was clear, specific. "I have been riding for 3 days. Patricia was quiet for a moment. The morning wind moved through the grass between them. The sound from the ravine, always present now that she had learned to hear it, continued its patient undersong. "My name is Patricia Venthrow," she said. "This is my land, left to me by my father. The ravine is at the edge of it." She paused. "You had better tell me who you are before I decide whether to show it to you." He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite amusement, but lived in the territory between the two. "I am Eliseo Halodna." The name landed in the air between them with a weight she had not anticipated. She knew the name. Everyone in the kingdom knew the name. Eliseo Halodna, Alpha King, young lord of the northern territories and sovereign of the realm that stretched from the Ardenmere range south to the sea. He had taken the throne 5 years ago at 25, young for a king, and the stories that circulated about him were of 2 kinds. The ones told by his enemies, which described a man of iron will and ferocious capability, and the ones told by those who had fought under his banner, which described those same qualities with admiration, rather than fear. In neither version of the story was he the sort of man who rode alone into the hills because he had a dream. Patricia looked at him steadily. "You could have sent soldiers," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "I came alone because I did not want to frighten whoever I found here before I had the chance to speak with them." She absorbed this. "You thought about that." "I thought about it." She looked at the horse, which was a very fine horse, dark bay, with the muscled neck of an animal bred for distance and stamina. And then she looked at the king who had ridden it alone into the hills because he had trusted a dream enough to act on it. She thought about her father's note. "Let it teach you." She thought about the 7 nights she had spent learning the language of the portal. "Come then," she said. "I will show you the ravine." She led him down the path along the northern wall, going first, and she heard him following behind her with the controlled silence of someone who knew how to move without announcing himself. The quiet of a man who had spent time in places where noise could be the difference between survival and its absence. She did not look back. She showed him the handholds and the ledges, and when she reached the floor of the ravine, she turned and watched him descend with his long body folded into the narrow path, more graceful than she would have expected for his size. He stood on the floor of the ravine and looked at the symbols on the walls, and the light they cast on his face made something in his expression shift, the way water shifts when something drops into it. "These were in my dream," he said quietly. "Exactly these." "What else was in your dream?" He turned from the symbols and looked at her. In the ravine's light, with the blue-silver luminescence on his skin and his dark hair loose around his face, he looked less like a king and more like something older, something that belonged to the same category as the symbols and the portal, something that had been shaped by time and weight into a particular and necessary form. "Light coming from the cavern," he said. "And the woman, you, standing inside it, and a sense of urgency." He paused. The dream had the quality of warning. Patricia took him to the cavern entrance. She moved the vines aside and led him in, and when the portal's light brightened in response to their presence, she heard him draw a breath. It was the breath of someone who has been told a thing repeatedly and has intellectually understood it, and has now finally felt it with the body. The breath of belief becoming real. He stood before the portal for a long time in silence. She let him look. "This is a sanctuary," she said at last. "My father left it to me. The land has been in my family, though I never knew him, and I did not know about this until 3 weeks ago. I have been here a week." She paused. "I have been learning." He turned to look at her. "What have you learned?" She told him. She told him about the energy conduits in the stone, about the way the portal gathered and focused what moved through the earth, about the symbols and their meanings, which she was still decoding, but which she understood well enough to know that they were instructions, a manual for using the sanctuary's power that had been carved into the walls over generations by the people who had guarded it. She told him about the healing resonance she had felt on the 3rd day, when she had cut her hand on a sharp edge of rock, and the portal's warmth had moved into the wound and closed it. Not instantly, but over the course of an hour, knitting the flesh back with a thoroughness that left no scar. She told him about the sense of depth beneath the portal, the way it connected not just to the Earth's surface but to something foundational, some energy that lived in the planet's deep structure. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look at her with the skepticism she had expected from a king, from a man of practical power. He looked at her with a quality of attention that she would learn, over time, was one of his most characteristic traits. The ability to give his full and genuine focus to whatever he had decided deserved it. "I dreamed of urgency," he said when she had finished. "A warning. Is there something coming that this place needs to be used against?" Patricia had been thinking about this question since the 2nd day, when the portal's energy had shifted briefly toward something she could only describe as alarm. A change in the resonance that felt less like a heartbeat and more like a pulse quickening. She had not known what it meant. She had filed it in the category of things she needed more information to understand. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I think yes." He nodded. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his dark coat and took out a folded map, well used, marked with notes in a small, precise hand, and spread it on the cavern floor between them. "Show me," he said. "Show me everything you know." They sat on the cavern floor, and Patricia showed him the map of symbols she had copied into the margins of her botany book, and he studied them with the focused intelligence of a man who had spent his life reading terrain and tactics. And he said, "These two, here, they appear in the old Chronicles. I have seen them in the archives. They are the old language of Ardenmere, the pre-kingdom script that the scholars believe was used by the first settlers of the northern range." "You read old script?" "I had a good education," he said, with a brevity that was not arrogance but something quieter, the statement of a man who had used everything he was given and did not brag about the using. "What does this one mean in context with those?" They worked for 3 hours, cross-referencing her observations with his knowledge of historical texts, and the symbols resolved slowly from mystery into meaning. Energy, earth, channel, strengthen, heal, protect, the old words for the old intentions of the people who had built this place. The portal was not a passive conduit. It was designed to be used, to be directed, to be focused by someone who understood its language toward specific purposes. Heal the sick, strengthen the weak, protect the boundaries. "It can strengthen warriors," Eliseo said very quietly, his finger tracing a sequence of symbols that she had not yet decoded fully. "This sequence. It describes the enhancement of physical capability, speed, endurance, the ability to withstand injury. It would be military in application." He was quiet for a moment. The dream, the urgency. Patricia looked at the symbols he was indicating and felt the portal's warmth adjust subtly, as if confirming. "What do you know about Mirmalnir?" she asked. The air in the cavern changed. Even the portal's light seemed to still slightly, as if listening. Eliseo looked up from the map. His black eyes were very level. "How do you know that name?" "The energy here has been behaving strangely for the past 2 days, she said. "A disruption in the pattern. Last night I heard one of the symbols at the ravine's entrance change its resonance. I looked it up in the sequence. The symbol is the old word for devastation, but it appears next to the symbol for the east. Mirmalnir, he said, is a dragon, ancient, larger than any that have been seen in living memory. He has been dormant for 3 centuries, sealed beneath the Eastern Reach Mountains by magic that the Old Kingdom scholars worked over years. 3 weeks ago, the eastern border villages began reporting devastation, burned fields, collapsed structures, something large moving through the mountains." He paused. "I have been traveling to gather intelligence. The reports are consistent. Mirmalnir is awake." Patricia looked at the portal. "This place was built to protect the kingdom," she said. "I think I was meant to find it now. I think my father knew." "Your father guarded this ravine?" "He must have. His family must have for generations." She thought of the hands carved into the stone, steady and ancient. "And he left it to me." Eliseo looked at her with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. Not by the sisters at the orphanage, not by the notary with his spectacles, not by anyone. It was the expression of someone who has recognized something valuable and rare, and is not ashamed of the recognition. "Patricia Venthro," he said, "I think we need to work together." She met his eyes. They were very black and very direct, and they held the quality of a man who meant everything he said and said only what he meant. "I think so too," she said. So it began. They established a routine in the days that followed, returning to the cavern each morning and spending hours in the work of understanding, she teaching him what she had learned of the portal's operation, he bringing to bear his knowledge of old histories and military strategy and the specific topography of the kingdom's borders, which he knew as well as he knew his own body. He sent word to the capital by carrier bird, brief and commanding, instructing his advisors on certain matters and requesting certain documents from the royal archives. He made a camp near hers at the ravine's edge, a soldier's camp, disciplined and minimal, a bedroll and a fire and a pack of provisions. He was, she discovered, a person who did not waste anything. Not words, not movement, not time, not attention. When he worked completely. When he rested, which was rarely, he rested with the same completeness. He ate simply. He slept briefly. He was awake before her every morning, sitting at the fire with a cup of something bitter and a look of deep inward focus. And she would emerge from her blanket to find the fire already built up and the world already organized by someone who had quietly taken care of it. She found this disconcerting at first. She had never in her life had anyone take care of anything for her. She had been the one, in the orphanage's hierarchy, who noticed when the younger children were cold or frightened, who built up the fire when the sisters were occupied, who organized what little there was to organize. She knew how to manage herself and to manage around her what needed managing. She did not know what to do with someone who simply, without announcement or expectation of gratitude, made sure the fire was burning. "You don't have to do that," she said on the third morning. He looked up from the fire. "I was awake anyway. That's not the point." He looked at her for a moment with that direct and patient attention. What is the point? She could not quite articulate it. She was aware, in a way that made her faintly uneasy, that she was not used to being considered. Not in the practical, physical way of a warm fire, not in the intellectual way he had demonstrated in the cavern when he took her observations seriously and built on them without condescension. She was not accustomed to being treated as someone whose cold mattered, whose thinking was worth engaging with, whose presence in a space was worth organizing around. "Nothing," she said finally, and accepted the cup he offered her, which turned out to contain tea, made from something he had found growing at the forest's edge, dried and pressed against the heat of a stone to open the oils, and it was warm and slightly sweet, and exactly what she would have chosen if she had known how to choose it. He turned back to the fire. She sat beside it, and the morning light came over the hills, and neither of them spoke for a while, and it was the most comfortable silence she had ever been in. In the cavern, they were a different kind of partnership. The work required something of both of them that neither could supply alone. Her sensitivity to the portal's energy, her ability to read the symbols by feel as much as by sight, and his knowledge of historical context and strategic application. The ability to think about power in terms of how it could be used, and to whom it should be directed. They developed a shorthand over the days, a way of communicating mid-session that was half words and half gesture. She would place her hand at a particular point on the portal's frame, and he would watch the quality of her posture and tell her what the old texts said about that position's function, and the portal would respond, the luminescence brightening or shifting in frequency as they found the right combination. He never made her feel that what she was doing was peculiar, or that her sensitivity to the portal was something to be examined rather than trusted. He never treated her as a curiosity or an asset, the way she had half expected a king to treat an Omega girl who had stumbled onto something useful. He treated her as a collaborator, an equal. She found this more disorienting than the fire. On the 5th day, they had a breakthrough. She had been working with a sequence of symbols in the portal's lower left quadrant, a repeating pattern that had resisted her attempts to decode it, that seemed to be doing something different from the rest of the structure, not gathering or channeling, but something more active. She placed both hands on the frame at those symbols' positions, and closed her eyes, and let the portal's energy move through her without trying to direct it. And she felt it shift and reach and extend outward, beyond the cavern's walls, into the rock of the ravine, into the mineral veins, spreading through the earth in a radius that she could feel expanding with her palm's warmth as its only instrument. "Something is happening to the ravine," Eliseo said from beside her. His voice was very calm. "The symbols on the walls. They are brightening from the inside. She kept her eyes closed. She felt the energy reach the surface, felt it emerge from the stone at the ravine's edges like water from a spring. And then she felt something unexpected. A barrier. Not physical, not stone. Something woven of the same energy, but organized differently, organized with intention, forming a perimeter around the ravine that was permeable to people and animals but would not, she understood with sudden clarity, be permeable to something with destructive intent, something old and large and burning. It creates a protective barrier, she said, her voice distant because most of her was elsewhere, extended through the earth, around the ravine, around wherever I direct it. It would hold against fire. A pause. Against a dragon's fire. She heard him exhale, slow and long. She opened her eyes. The portal's light was different now, more complex, as if the activation of that sequence had added a new layer to its operation. She took her hands from the frame and stood for a moment in the recalibration of her own body, the process of pulling herself back from the earth's extent into the particular borders of her own skin. Eliseo was looking at her. His expression was the kind that people reserve for things that are both wonderful and sobering, wonder and weight in equal measure. "You protected the whole ravine," he said, "from where you were standing." "Yes." "What is the upper limit of the radius?" "I don't know yet. I've only just found the sequence." She looked at him. "But the principle should scale. If I can do this from the center of the portal with my full focus, I should be able to extend the barrier much further." He was quiet for a moment, thinking with the stillness of a man who had made decisions with lives attached to them and knew what that required of thought. If Mirmulnir attacks, we cannot meet him in the field with soldiers alone. The reports suggest his fire is different from ordinary dragon fire. Older, more intense, able to burn through the kind of armor our army carries. We would lose badly. He looked at the portal. But if we can bring warriors to this place, if the portal can enhance their capabilities as the symbols describe, and if you can extend the barrier to the battlefield, we would change the equation. "We," she said. He looked back at her. "We," he confirmed. Something in her chest, in the specific region where she had carried the quiet ache of belonging to no one and nothing, shifted. She did not know what to do with it. So she looked at the portal and began to teach him the sequence she had just discovered. The days settled into a rhythm that was its own kind of music. The work in the mornings, the breaking for the midday heat with food, and the documents Eliseo's advisors sent at intervals by carrier bird, the return to the cavern in the afternoon, when the light in the ravine changed to something amber and deep. They talked while they worked. They talked while they ate. They talked at the fire in the evenings with the stars appearing one by one above the ridge, and Patricia discovered that Eliseo Halodna, Alpha King, was someone who had more thoughts than his brevity suggested, and who, given a context in which they were welcome, offered them without performance or pretense. He told her about the throne, about the years of learning it, about the particular loneliness of authority, the way that power separates a person from the ordinary textures of other people's lives. He told her about his father, who had been a good king, but a distant one, not cruel, simply absent in the particular way of men who believe their public role is their whole person. He told her about the advisors who spoke to his position rather than to him, about the court's endless performance of itself, the costumes and hierarchies, and the way every word said in that context was also, always, a strategic move. "You are very different from court," she said one evening, watching his profile against the fire. "Court is a place I inhabit," he said. "It is not what I am." "What are you?" He was quiet for a moment. The fire cracked. "Someone who has spent a long time looking for the right question to ask," he said, "and who has not, until recently, found the right person to ask it with." She felt his eyes on her and looked up. The firelight was warm on his face, in his dark hair, and his expression was the one she had come to recognize as his honest face, the one that was not performing anything. "I've been told my whole life that I am nothing," she said. The words came out plainly, not for sympathy, simply as fact. That I am small and alone and easy to overlook. I grew up in a building full of children who were told the same thing, and most of them believed it. She paused. I always thought they were wrong about me. I did not know why. I just had a strong feeling that the world contained something for me, somewhere, and that I had not found it yet. "And now?" he said. She looked at the fire and then back at him. "Now I am beginning to understand that the feeling was right." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said quietly and without decoration, "I am glad you did not stop believing it." She turned back to the fire so that he would not see what happened to her face when he said things like that. In the second week, the reports from the east became urgent. 3 villages burned. A mountain pass collapsed under the force of something that the surviving travelers described as a moving darkness. Vast and hot and purposeful. A patrol of the king's soldiers had sighted it at distance, the shape emerging from a cloud of its own smoke. And the rider who brought the report had arrived with his horse lathered and his face the color of clay. Eliseo read the report at the fire that evening, and his face did not change, but the quality of the air around him changed. A concentration, a gathering of will that Patricia could feel in the same register as the portal's energy, different in nature, but not entirely unlike it in texture. "How much time?" he asked. She was already down in the cavern. She could feel the portal's alarm signature with greater clarity now. The disruption in the pattern that she had first noticed a week ago was louder, more insistent, a vibration in the stone that was not the Earth's natural rhythm, but the response of a sensitive instrument to something wrong in the world above it. She pressed her hands to the frame and read the symbol's urgency, felt the direction of it, east and closing. She climbed back up to tell him. "Days," she said, "not weeks." He stood. The firelight made him tall and very still, and she saw the king then in the way she had not fully seen him in their days of work together. The man who had been made by years of command, who carried the weight of hundreds of thousands of lives in the set of his shoulders, and did not put it down, not even in the hills, not even at a fire beside a girl in a red dress. "I need to send for my army," he said. "I need them positioned before it arrives." "Send for them," she said. "I will be ready." He looked at her. Patricia. Something in the way he said her name, not a question, not a command, just her name as though it was something he had been holding carefully and was now acknowledging aloud, made her breath go still. "You do not have to be part of this," he said. "This is a military matter. This is my war and my kingdom. You found this place, and what you have discovered here is extraordinary. But you are not a soldier, and you are under no obligation to stand on a battlefield." She looked at him for a long moment. "Eliseo," she said. His name felt different in her mouth than she had expected, specific and warm. "This place was left to me for this reason. I can feel it every time I touch the portal. The sanctuary was built for this moment, by people who knew this moment would come. And they built it knowing that someone from my line would be here to use it." She paused. "I am not obligated. I am choosing." He was quiet for a long moment. The fire between them breathed slowly. "Then I will not ask you to stand behind the lines," he said. "I will stand beside you." She had not expected that either. She had expected the command arrangement, the king's army in its ranks, herself at the portal's center as a kind of strategic instrument, separated from the violence by the function she was performing. She had not expected beside. "You are the king," she said. "I am also a man who has found something worth protecting," he said, "and who intends to be present when it is threatened." She did not know what to say to that. So she said nothing, and the fire said something else on their behalf, its warm light touching them both. and the stars multiplied overhead, and the ravine sang its patient undersong in the earth below their feet. The army arrived in 3 days. They came up the valley road in the pre-dawn, a column of steel and leather and horses, 2,000 soldiers of the northern territories, Eliseo's personal forces, trained to his standard, which she was beginning to understand was considerably higher than she had imagined a standard could be. They made camp in the valley below the foothills, efficient and quiet, the noise of it reaching her up at the ravine's edge as a low, continuous sound of organized purpose. Eliseo went down to meet them. She watched him ride down the hill and disappear into the camp, and something in her chest felt the absence of him as a specific thing, not a general loneliness, but a particular one. The absence of this particular person, and she recognized it the way she had recognized the portal's resonance on the first day, as something her body understood before her mind had vocabulary for it. She went down into the cavern and worked. She extended the barrier sequence across the floor of the valley, feeling the portal's energy follow her direction through the mineral veins in the earth, spreading wide and thin as it reached its current limit, and then pushing past it, finding new paths, new connections between the deep strata and the surface. She held it for an hour, then 2. Then let it go and rested, breathing through the recalibration. When Eliseo came back in the evening with 2 of his senior commanders, a woman with the broad build and the brisk manner of someone who had been fighting for 30 years, and a man whose face bore the particular flatness of someone who had been frightened very badly very recently, Patricia showed them what she could do. She put the barrier over the valley floor, visible this time, a shimmer in the air like heat haze but cool, blue-silver, the same luminescence as the portal's veins. The commander named Aldra touched the edge of it with her hand and pulled back with a sharp breath. "It repels," she said. "Anything with destructive intent," Patricia said. "I am still learning the fine calibration, but the principle is consistent. Dragonfire would not pass through it." The commander named Fenwick looked at Eliseo with the expression of someone recalculating something important. "My lord," he said. "She is the sanctuary's guardian," Eliseo said. And there was something in the way he said it, not declarative but something warmer, something closer to recognition, that made Aldra glance between them with sharp eyes and say nothing. They worked through that evening and the next day on strategy, the commander's practical knowledge of formation and engagement, married to Patricia's knowledge of the portal's capabilities. She could extend the barrier in sectors, which meant they could hold certain areas while leaving others open for the army's own offensive operations. She could strengthen individual warriors through contact with the portal's energy, a process she described to Aldra as similar to the healing she had experienced, an infusion of the Earth's foundational resilience into the human body, not permanent but sustained, enough to make the difference in a close engagement. "How many can you strengthen at once?" Aldra asked. "I don't know the upper limit," Patricia said honestly. "I have only practiced on myself." Aldra looked at her steadily. "Will you practice on soldiers?" She spent the following morning in the camp below, moving among the soldiers Aldra selected, making contact through her palms at their wrists or shoulders, feeling the portal's warmth extend through her and into them, watching their postures change subtly as the Earth's resilience settled into their muscles, their bones, the deep tissue of their capability. Most of them looked at her with a mixture of wariness and something else. Not precisely reverence, but adjacent to it. The kind of regard that people give to things they do not understand, but have decided to trust. Eliseo walked beside her through the camp. He said little. His presence organized the space around her in a way she was beginning to rely on, not because she needed protection, not exactly, but because his regard for her had a quality that created room for her to work in, as if the world was slightly less likely to dismiss her when he was standing in it beside her. She noticed the soldiers' faces change when they looked at him. The change was not fear, or not only fear. It was the specific alteration that happens in a person's expression when they see someone who has earned their regard absolutely and knows it and asks nothing extra from them for it. He spoke to them by name. He remembered which ones had ridden the distance from the eastern border and asked after the road conditions. He listened to what the scouts reported with the same full attention he gave to Patricia in the cavern, no hierarchy in his listening. Information that helped him serve the people he was responsible for was worth listening to regardless of its source. She watched him work and thought about the two versions of him she was seeing. The man who had built a fire for her before she woke, and the king who held a kingdom in the focus of his attention with the same careful steadiness. She thought they were not two versions but one, that the same quality expressed itself differently in different contexts, but was always, at its root, the same. A commitment to the people and things and places in his care so thorough that it had reshaped him from the outside in. She thought about the orphanage, about growing up with no one who was in her care and no one in whose care she was. She thought about the particular shape of that emptiness. She thought about the fire already built when she woke. On the third morning after the army's arrival, Mirmulnir came. The warning reached them before the dragon did. The eastern scouts reporting smoke on the horizon, a darkness moving faster than a darkness of that size should have been able to move. And then the sound, audible at the camp before the scouts had finished delivering their reports, a sound too large for any single throat. A resonance that had the quality of the earth itself being struck hard and badly. Patricia was in the cavern when she felt it. The portal's resonance shattered instantly from its patient rhythm into something she had not felt before, a frequency of active alarm, urgent and specific. And she felt in the mineral veins the directional pulse of approach, east and close and burning. She placed both hands on the frame and felt the depth of the earth respond to her need, opening the channel wider than she had achieved in practice. The energy flowing into her and through her with a generosity that felt like the earth saying yes. Finally, this is what I was holding it for. She heard boots on the ravine path, Eliseo's step, which she knew now from the others by its particular rhythm. "Patricia," he said from the cavern entrance. His voice was the voice she had heard him use in council, clear and carrying and without a spare syllable. "It is here." "I know," she said. "Give me one more minute." She extended the barrier. She pushed it as far as she had ever pushed it, farther, feeling the portal's energy like something physical in her hands, malleable, enormous, ancient. And she shaped it into a wall and stretched that wall across the breadth of the valley, floor to ridge, a shimmer of blue-silver in the morning air that was visible from the camp below, and that she felt settle into place with the specific satisfaction of something done exactly right. She took her hands from the frame. She breathed. She straightened her red dress. She walked out into the light. Eliseo was standing at the ravine's edge. He had his sword, a long blade that she had seen him practice with in the early mornings, and his armor, dark and functional, the kind that was not ornamental. Behind him, visible down the valley slope, the army was in formation. Aldra's voice carrying up the hill as she organized the lines. He looked at her when she emerged. His face was the face she had come to know, the one that did not perform. And what was in it was something she had not seen there before. Not quite fear, not for himself, but a concern that was concentrated on her, specific to her. The look of a person for whom the outcome of a thing has become personal in a way that was not expected. "The barrier is up," she said. "It covers the valley." "I felt it," he said. "The soldiers felt it too." "Where do you need me to be?" "Here," he said. "At the portal. You can maintain the barrier and direct the strengthening from here. You do not need to be in the valley." He paused. "I need you here." She understood that the last sentence was not tactical. "And where will you be?" she asked. "In the valley," he said, "with my army." She looked at him. He looked back. The morning was very bright, and the wind had died, and the distant sound of Mirmulnir was getting closer. a vibration she could feel in the soles of her feet, even through stone. "Come back," she said. It was not a request she had practiced saying. She had not practiced it because she had never had anyone to say it to. It came out plain and unguarded, and she saw something move through his expression, swift as a shadow across a field. He reached out and took her hand. His hand was very large and very warm, and it held hers with the specific quality of deliberate care, and he said quietly, "For no one but her." "I intend to." Then he let go, and he turned, and he went down the hill. She turned back to the cavern. The battle lasted 3 hours. She was at the portal for all of them. She maintained the barrier with one hand on the frame, and felt it absorb Mirmalnir's fire in waves, the heat of it enormous even at the portal's remove, the blue-silver shimmer visible from the cavern entrance turning briefly orange where the fire struck before reasserting itself. She directed the portal's strengthening energy through the earth into the soldiers it could reach, feeling their physical capability amplify through the connection, and she heard, at distance, the change in the battle's sound as fighters who had been expecting to lose ground began to hold it. Mirmalnir was vast. She had not had a proper picture of vast until she heard the concussion of his landing, and felt it in the stone walls of the cavern, and saw, through the entrance, the silhouette of something that blotted out 1/3 of the eastern sky. He was ancient, and he was angry, and his fire was the color of the sun at noon, white and total. She pushed the barrier harder. She felt the portal respond with everything it had, the mineral veins in the earth going incandescent with effort, the symbols on the walls blazing, the sound of the ravine moving from its patient undersong to something operatic, immense, the earth giving what it had been holding. She pushed. Aldra's voice from the valley, cutting through everything, calling the cavalry to move, calling the archers to position, and Eliseo's voice, once, carrying over all of it, a single word of command that had in it the absolute authority of a man who would not accept a different outcome. The barrier held. And then, in the second hour, something shifted. She felt it in her chest before she felt it in the stone. A change in the frequency of the battle's energy, a concentration of darkness to the west of the formation, a movement she had not anticipated. A second approach. Not Mirmalnir, not dragon. Something smaller but numerous. Creatures she did not have names for moving through the forest on the western ridge, using the dragon's noise as cover. She could not redirect the barrier without weakening it against Mirmalnir. She could not leave the portal. She did the only thing she could. She found the sequence in the lower right quadrant of the portal's frame that she had not yet fully decoded, and she put both hands on it, and she chose to trust the sanctuary's design. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. From the mineral veins in the western ridge, from the rock itself, a pulse of light emerged, moving through the stone and into the undergrowth where the secondary threat was moving. And she felt the creatures in the forest encounter something ancient in the earth, something they recognized and feared, and she felt them halt, scatter, retreat. She had used a defense she did not know she had. The portal was still teaching her, even now, even in the middle of everything. She wept. She did not know exactly why. She was too concentrated to have room for complex emotion. But the tears came and she let them come, and she kept her hands on the frame. In the third hour, the battle reached its turning point. She felt Mirmalnir's fire diminish as the army, strengthened and held by what she was pouring through the earth into them, pressed the attack, and she felt the dragon's resistance, and then the specific quality of a massive intelligence encountering an obstacle it had not expected and recalculating its approach. And then the sound from the valley changed again. Not the sound of ongoing combat, but something else. Something that moved through the stone and into her as a vibration she had to parse, slowly before she understood it. Triumph. And then, silence. She kept the barrier up for another 20 minutes. She did not know what moved in the silence, whether Mirmalnir was genuinely defeated or only withdrawn, and she did not release the portal's energy until she had felt the earth calm from its alarm signature back towards something closer to its ordinary rhythm, until the pulse of the mineral veins had slowed from crisis to resolution. Then she let go. She stepped back from the portal. Her legs gave way, and she sat down hard on the cavern floor, and she was shaking, the whole length of her. The fine tremor of deep fatigue that comes after the body has done more than its ordinary measure. The portal's light was still bright but quieter now, the symbol's pulse settling. She sat on the stone floor of the ancient cavern in the blue-silver light, in her red dress, with her white hair loose around her shoulders, and she breathed. She breathed. She breathed. Aldra came to the cavern entrance first, her armor marked with the testimony of the fight, her expression that of someone who has seen many things and has just seen something they did not expect to see on that list. "The dragon is gone," she said. "We drove him back into the eastern mountains. The passage he used is collapsed." A pause, the soldier's economical pause of someone recounting difficult things matter-of-factly. "We lost 11. We should have lost hundreds." Patricia looked up at her. "Eliseo." Aldra's face changed very slightly. "He is being brought up now." The word being made the shaking worse. He had been struck in the battle's final stage, when the army pressed its advantage, and Mir Mulnir made his last sweep before retreat, the wing strike that had come not as fire, but as a physical blow, the force of it taking 2 soldiers from their feet entirely, and catching Eliseo in the side, the armor holding but the force of impact sufficient to break something underneath it. He was conscious, Aldra said, but in pain, and the physicians were with him. They brought him up to the ravine on a litter, which he was visibly impatient with, and Patricia came out of the cavern to meet them, and looked at him, and felt something large and unmanageable move through her at the sight of him pale and too still, his long black hair loose on the litter's surface, his jaw set hard against the pain he was not going to say out loud. "Patricia," he said when he saw her, and her name in his voice had the quality it had had at the fire 2 nights ago, careful and particular and warm. "Stop trying to sit up," she said. "I am not." "You are going to be still," she said, with a firmness she had not known she possessed, and something in her face must have communicated that this was not negotiable, because he was still. She knelt beside the litter. She put both hands on his side, over the armor, and she let herself feel through the metal and leather to what was beneath, the damaged tissue, the 2 cracked ribs and the deeper bruising that was still spreading. She felt the portal's energy in her palms. She was still full of it. She had been conducting it for 3 hours, and it had not fully left her yet. And she directed it inward, into the injury, with the same precision she had learned in the cavern, the sequence for healing, the sequence she had practiced on her own cut hand and discovered in the first week. But more complex now, more intentional, more sustained. She felt the damaged tissue begin to respond. The healing was not instant. It did not work that way. It worked the way the earth worked, steadily and thoroughly and in the correct order. The deepest damage first and then outward. The body's own processes accelerated and assisted rather than overridden. She held the connection for a long time, kneeling in the dirt beside the litter with her hands on his side, and her white hair falling forward and her eyes closed. She felt him breathing. Felt the pain diminish in the tissue beneath her hands. Felt the cracked bone begin the slow process of genuine repair. When she finally lifted her hands and opened her eyes, the afternoon had gone golden, and the shadows of the hills were long. Eliseo was looking at her. His color was better. The tightness around his eyes that had been the pain's advertisement had eased. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I should not have been struck by a dragon wing," he said. "But better." His black eyes were very direct. "Patricia, you just healed me." "I did. Using the portal's energy." "Using the portal's energy." He was quiet for a moment. The golden light moved across his face. He reached up and took her hand from where it rested on the edge of the litter, and held it. And his hold was the same as it had been on the ravine's edge before the battle, large and warm and deliberate. "You held the barrier for 3 hours," he said. "You defeated the secondary attack. And then you did this?" He did not let go of her hand. "How much does it cost you?" She thought about the shaking, the floor of the cavern, the tears she had not understood. "I am tired," she said honestly, "but I am not harmed. You should rest." "So should you." He looked at her for another moment. "Patricia," he said, for the 3rd time today, and each time he said it was different, a different quality of attention. This time something in it that was not tactful and was not measured, but was simply honest. The face he wore at the fire in the evenings, the one that did not perform. "When all of this is settled, I would like to say something to you. Not as a king, as a man." She looked at him, the gold light, his dark eyes, her hand in his. "When you are healed," she said, "and rested and standing up properly, you may say whatever you would like." Something moved through his expression that she had not seen there before, something like relief, like a knot coming loose. "Then I will recover quickly," he said. She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in. She counted in her head. A very long time, and it surprised her. The cleanness of it. The way it moved through her body like the portal's warmth, but lighter, human, uncomplicated. He was watching her laugh with the expression of someone in the presence of something they had not known they needed until they were in the presence of it. "Rest now," she said, and stood, and went back to the ravine's edge, and sat in the last of the afternoon light, and breathed the evening air that smelled of smoke and pine and the specific mineral warmth of the earth, and tried to organize the feelings that were moving through her like weather. She could not organize them. She let them be. In the days that followed, the valley filled with the particular busyness of aftermath. The physicians, the accounting of losses, the dispatch of riders to report to the capital and to the eastern border towns. The practical matters of a military action resolved, and its resolution made real. Eliseo recovered with a speed that his physicians attributed to exceptional constitution, and that Patricia, who said nothing on the subject, understood was the portal's work continuing in his tissue. He was on his feet by the 2nd morning, and in council by the 3rd, the slight care with which he moved his left side the only remaining evidence of the injury, and even that was diminishing. He came to the cavern each morning before the council sessions began. He would descend into the ravine alone and stand before the portal for a time, not touching it, simply present with it, and Patricia would watch from the entrance and say nothing, understanding that this was his own form of the learning, his own relationship with the place forming at its own pace. One morning he spoke to her without turning from the portal. "I have been thinking about what you told me on the first day," he said, "about growing up in the orphanage, about being told you were nothing." She was quiet. "The world was wrong about you," he said, "in every particular." She did not know what to do with the simplicity of that. "The world often is," she said. He turned from the portal then. In the blue-silver light, with his dark hair loose and the cavern's warmth in the air between them, he was very much himself, all of himself, the king and the man together, and neither of them performing anything. "I said I would speak to you when I was standing properly," he said. "You are standing properly." "Yes." He looked at her with the full and particular attention she had come to know as his most honest mode. "I came to these hills because a dream told me to, and I found you. And in the time since I have learned that you are the most remarkable person I have encountered in 30 years of encountering people. You are capable and clear and generous with the world, in a way that the world has given you no particular reason to be." He paused. "You looked at me and did not see the king first. You saw the man, and you treated him as someone worth your time. I have not experienced that frequently." Another pause. And I am aware that what I am about to say is irregular, given the difference in our circumstances and the brief time of our acquaintance. And I am asking it anyway because I have learned in the past weeks that you are someone who prefers honest directness to comfortable indirection. Patricia was very still. Her heart was doing something large and rapid in its place. Patricia Venthrow, he said, I would like to spend the rest of my life learning what you know, and telling you what I know, and building fires before you wake, and standing beside you at whatever portal asks for standing beside. I would like to be someone worthy of the name you said at the ravine's edge before the battle. I would like, he said, and his voice was steady but his eyes were very bright, to ask you to be my queen. The ravine sang in the earth beneath her feet. The portal breathed its slow, warm breath. The ancient symbols on the walls continued their patient luminescence. She thought about the note in her father's handwriting. You are stronger than the world has told you. She thought about the fire already built when she woke. She thought about her hand in his at the ravine's edge, and the way he had said come back as an intention, a promise, a man who meant everything he said and said only what he meant. She thought about the particular shape of the emptiness she had carried her whole life, and how, in recent weeks, it had been quietly and specifically filled. I am an Omega, she said, orphan-born. No lineage the court would recognize. The court will recognize the guardian of the realm's oldest sanctuary, he said, the woman who protected 10,000 people from a dragon's fire, the woman who healed the king. He looked at her steadily. They will recognize my queen. She looked at him for a long time. You should know, she said, that I have very strong opinions about several things, and I do not keep them to myself. I know, he said. I am counting on it. And I will continue to work with the portal. The sanctuary will need a guardian regardless of what title I hold. I would not ask you to give that up. I would ask to be part of it. And the fire in the mornings, she said, and something in her voice was not quite steady now. Something in her was done being composed about this. I would like to continue with the fire in the mornings. He was looking at her with the expression he wore at the fire in the evenings, and there was something in it now that was brighter than she had seen there before, something unguarded and complete. The fire in the mornings, he agreed. For as long as we both have mornings. Then yes, said Patricia Venthrow, who had grown up with nothing and found everything in a ravine in the northern hills. Yes, Eliseo, I will be your queen. He crossed the space between them, 3 steps, and he took her hands in both of his, and he looked down at her with his dark eyes and his long black hair, and the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he had not known he was traveling toward, and finds it to be exactly right. And she looked up at him with her white hair, and her red dress, and the warmth of the portal at her back. And he held her hands with the careful, deliberate tenderness she had come to understand was the real interior of this man, beneath all the ferocity and command and the king's authority, the true texture of him. And he said nothing, because everything had already been said. Then he bent his head, and she lifted hers, and the ravine sang, and the portal blazed, and the symbols on the walls lit all at once with the indiscriminate joy of something that has been patient for a very long time, and has finally been given cause to celebrate. They were wed in the capital 3 months later. The ceremony was held in the great hall of the palace, which Patricia had never seen before, and which was large enough that the orphanage could have fit inside it 3 times with room to spare. Aldra stood to the left in her dress uniform, her expression one of fierce approval. The court was assembled in its full splendor, the robes and the jewels and the performances of themselves that Patricia had been warned about, and she stood before them all in a gown that was, at her unambiguous insistence, red, not the worn red of the orphanage dress, a deep, deliberate crimson, silk and embroidered at the edges with the symbols of the ravine, the old script of Ardenmere, the marks of the sanctuary that had been in her family's keeping since before the kingdom had its name. The palace seamstress had looked at the symbols she drew, and then looked at her and said nothing, and then produced a garment of startling beauty. Eliseo wore black, which was the only color she had ever seen him in, and which she had come to understand was not a statement of severity, but a preference for simplicity, for not adding anything unnecessary to the space he already occupied. He stood at the altar and watched her come down the aisle, and his expression did not perform anything. It simply said, in the language she had learned to read over weeks in a cavern in the northern hills, that this was exactly right, that he had been in his way traveling toward this person since before he had known her, that the dream had simply told him where to look. The vows were old, older than the ceremony's other elements. She had found them in the archives the symbol scholar had retrieved from the palace library at Eliseo's request, vows from the pre-kingdom tradition of Ardenmere, written in the old script, and she had decoded them herself, which meant she understood precisely what she was saying when she said them, the weight and the specificity of the ancient promises. And she said them clearly, in the old language, and then in the common tongue so the hall could hear. I choose this person above all others. I will stand beside them, and not before them, and not behind them but beside. I will tell them what I know. I will learn what they know. I will build the fire when I wake first. I will be the warmth at their back when the world is cold. I will guard what is precious between us with the same devotion I bring to any sacred thing. The hall was very quiet. Eliseo said his vows in the same voice he used in the council sessions and at the fire in the evenings, steady and complete, meaning everything. And when he took her hands in his, the warmth of them was the warmth she knew, specific and dear, and the court watched in the particular way of people who are witnessing something genuine in a context that does not always offer it. Afterward, in the garden that was theirs alone for the hour of the reception's first dance, Patricia stood with him in the evening air and smelled the flowers she had been reading about in books all her life, and seeing for the first time with her own eyes, and she thought about the worn boots and the yellow paper and the map she had studied for 21 nights. My father knew, she said. He knew what the Ravine would give me. He gave you the best thing he had, Eliseo said. He gave you the foundation. He gave me you, she said, because it was true, the chain of it, the ravine to the portal to the sanctuary to the king who had dreamed a dream and trusted it enough to ride alone into the hills. Eliseo looked at her. He gave you the door, he said. You walked through it yourself. She thought about that. She thought about the girl in the worn boots at the base of the path, the girl who had been told she was nothing, and had decided that was wrong. She thought about what it meant to trust your own conviction about yourself when the world has consistently suggested a different assessment. She thought she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. The year that followed was not without its difficulties. There were those at court who looked at the queen's white hair and her orphan origin and her unusual knowledge and found reasons for skepticism that were less about evidence than about the comfort of the hierarchies they had built their sense of the world upon. There were those who spoke in the old categories, Omega-born, unclaimed, and used those words to mean something diminished. There were those who had expected the Alpha King to choose differently, to choose a mate from the established lineages, from the political possibilities, from the catalog of expected options. Eliseo addressed this with the precision he brought to military problems, not by arguing against the skepticism, but by making it irrelevant. He included her in the council. He consulted her publicly and visibly on matters of strategic and historical significance, drawing on her knowledge of the Ravine's archives and the old script. He brought her to the eastern border when the damage assessments were conducted, and she walked the collapsed mountain pass, and read the old language in the stone, and understood how the ancient wards had failed, and how they could be rebuilt. He made her competence so visible and so undeniable that the question of her origin became, in practical terms, beside the point. She, for her part, was not interested in performing her worth. She worked. She was already doing the work, the sanctuary's ongoing maintenance and the deepening of her knowledge of its capabilities, and she did not alter her work to be observed. She did not alter her manner to be approved of. She had grown up invisible, and had decided that the right response to visibility was not to curate it, but to simply be herself with consistency, and let people draw their own conclusions about what that was worth. The council, mostly, came around. There were expeditions back to the Ravine. Eliseo came with her when the capital would allow it, and sometimes they would spend a week in the camp at the ravine's edge, as they had at the beginning, sleeping under the stars and waking to fires, and working in the cavern until the afternoon light changed to amber, and the portal's pulse was the most present sound in the world. She taught him more of the old script. He brought new documents from the archives that added context to what she was learning. They were, in those weeks, exactly what they had been in the beginning. Two people in a place of power, learning what it meant, and finding in the learning a companionship that asked nothing of either of them except their honesty. He was, she discovered, consistent. The man at the fire, and the man in the council chamber, and the man on the battlefield were the same man in different context, the same intelligence, and the same will, and the same tendency to say only what he meant, and the same quality of attention that made whoever he was looking at feel that they were the only thing in his field of vision. He was ferocious with the world when the world required it, in negotiations and in battle, and in the rare moments when someone at court required direct correction, and he was ferocious without apology, the full weight of him committed to whatever he had decided the situation required, and she found this not frightening, but clarifying, the way a clean edge is clarifying. And he was, with her, exactly as he had been from the first moment she had looked up from his fire and found him watching her with that patient and particular regard, gentle without weakness, careful without restraint. He noticed the things she did not say and asked about them quietly, without pressure. He noticed when she was tired and organized the world around her tiredness without announcing what he was doing. He fought for her preferences in the council with the same force he brought to military strategy, not because she was his queen, but because he believed she was right. And when he believed she was right, he was not interested in making it easy for people to be wrong. She had not known a person could be like this. She had grown up reading about it in books, the love that sees clearly and chooses anyway, that does not diminish the beloved in the act of caring for them, that holds space for the full complexity of a person, and calls it desirable rather than inconvenient. She had read about it, and had been quietly unsure that it was possible outside of books, that love in the real world was not always this attentive, this consistent, this genuinely glad to be what it was. She knew better now. On the night she told him she was expecting a child, they were at the Ravine. She had known for 2 weeks. She had let herself know it slowly, the way she let herself know most important things, sitting with it and turning it over and finding its weight and its shape before she trusted herself to speak it aloud. She had gone down into the cavern alone on the morning she knew, and she had stood before the portal and felt the warm certainty of it, and the portal had responded with a brightness she had not seen from it before. Not the alert flare of crisis, or the steady glow of ordinary use, but something full and rich, the brightness of a thing that recognizes itself in what it sees. She told him at the fire, in the evening, in the way she had always trusted most, directly and without preamble. She said, "I am going to have a child." He was very still for a moment. Then he turned from the fire and looked at her, and his expression was the one she would keep for the rest of her life, the one that was entirely his and entirely unperformed, and entirely for her. And it was the expression of a man who has been given something he did not know how to want until this moment, and who now understands exactly how much he wanted it. He took her hands. He held them the way he always held them, with the careful and deliberate warmth that still, after a year, felt like something she was learning the full dimensions of. He did not say anything for a long time. When he did speak, he said only, "I am glad." She knew what he meant. She knew that glad was not adequate to what he was feeling, that it was a word standing in for a whole architecture of feeling too large and particular to name quickly, and she accepted it the way she accepted most of the things he gave her, as the honest approximation of something genuine. "A boy," she said. "I think a boy. I have no evidence for this. I simply think so." "A boy," he repeated, and the sound of it in his mouth was a sound of someone tasting a thing they intend to cherish. They named him Adonis, which was the old Ardenmere word for new light, the symbol she had found in the portal's frame in the 3rd week, the one she had not been able to decode until she understood that it was not a tactical symbol at all, but an existential one, the symbol for what the sanctuary was ultimately for, not the defense of territory or the strengthening of armies, but the ongoing possibility of life well lived, light arriving in a world that has been through darkness and choosing to be present. Adonis was born in the late spring, in the rooms that looked out over the palace garden. He was, from his first breath, a person who occupied the world with the same completeness his father did, a boy of definite opinions and large presence and hair as black as his father's, with eyes that would resolve, in time, into a dark shade of green that belonged to neither of his parents, and that seemed, therefore, entirely his own. And Patricia Venthrow, Queen of Ardenmere, guardian of the hallowed Ravine, wife and mother and woman who had grown up with nothing and found everything, closed her eyes in the firelight and breathed, and was full. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.